Well, hello everyone. Hope everybody's enjoying this ESI Digital Winter. I know I have enjoyed quite a few of the panels so far. I'm Zachary Rozga. I'm the founder and CEO of Thies, and we are busy working with major global brands and their agencies to bring new advertising opportunities, in addition to the sponsorship model that's going to benefit esports teams and the influencers, streamers. So obviously, this topic and this panel that we're running today is very near and dear to me. And I'm extremely delighted to be on panel with such an illustrious group of people in the esports world. I think we have representation of some of the top teams globally in the world right now. And instead of me going around and introducing everyone, we're going to go sort of right to left on my screen. And we're going to actually start with a question. And then, so I would like for the panel to quickly introduce themselves, who they're representing today, and then answer the question. And the question is, should teams follow a traditional sports model or should they carve their own path? And I'm going to pass it to Kevin Chu.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me on, Zach and ESI. So I'm Kevin Chu, and I founded a company called Rally, which is a cryptocurrency company focused on creating social tokens. And we work with a lot of different esports teams and personalities, as well as musicians and athletes. I'm probably in the esports world a little bit better known for founding Gen G Esports, which is an esports team that is based in Korea, China, and the US, and competes in League of Legends and Overwatch, Valorant, and Fortnite, and NBA 2K, and a few other games. And before that, I've been in the video game business for about 15 years, making video games. I founded a company called Kabam, which created social games and then mobile games. So I've been in and around the video game industry, thinking about virtual goods, virtual monetization, new business models for quite a while. And so my natural answer to this is that I think esports needs new monetization models. I think that the traditional sports business models are just fine, and there's going to be great teams that build very good businesses by following traditional models. But I think what's the interesting part about esports right now, given its digital nature and its global nature, is how do you build a new digitally native business model? So that's what we think about for Gen G, and that was what led me to create Rally, which is to help sports teams, esports teams, athletes think about creating new digital monetization models. And so what Rally is that we basically take all the things that I use to build video games at Kabam, and I make them really easy for teams and for people and non-developers to use to create virtual currencies, virtual goods, virtual collectibles around their brands. And I'm very excited to talk more about that today.
Awesome. Daniel, you're up next.
Hi, Daniel Evans. I'm the president and CEO at Really. And this is kind of a loaded question for us because we come from traditional sports. Really is an AI and machine vision company that actually cut its teeth in the sports industry, allowing people to run their live streams, and we cut highlights as the events occur. So think ESPN, except done in real time. And so in the last 12 months, we've shifted to the esports world. I'm a lifetime gamer. I have been for a long time. So when COVID hit, we really shifted hard into the esports space. We now support 13 different titles. And that allows us to cut highlights, send them out to your social through automation, content automation pipelines that allow you to set up constant workflow, so you have a really nice wealth of content going out to your fans. As far as the question goes, I think it's going to be a combination of both. I think you've already, in the traditional sports, you've already seen kind of the influence of the digital side when you look at Twitch and what they're doing as far as bringing in 2 and 3 camera views for NFL games and then doing commentary from the creators over the top. I think that's an example of new ideas and new monetization models that esports will bring to, like, the NFL, the NBA, et cetera. But I also think in the esports space, as we mature, we need to learn from the lessons that have been proven from professional sports and bring those into esports, modernize them as things are digital. And we'll see. I don't think that there's let's follow the old or create the new. I think it's a combination of both.
Very good. We're going to go like a clock. So, Robin, you're up next.
Okay. I am Robin St. Germain. I am the Executive Director of Sales and Global Partnerships at the Houston Outlaws. I bring a slightly different sort of background and perspective to my role at the Houston Outlaws, where my background is very heavy in, traditional media marketing and business development. So, I am also relatively new in this role at the Houston Outlaws, but what I'm finding in sort of the time that I've been here is that and similar to what Daniel said, it's not about the traditional sports model versus the esports model. It is a little bit of what we're trying to call sort of the new media model. And that new media model sort of takes into account both sort of the esports model and the traditional sports model. I think we all want to bring sort of an immersive experience to our fans that allow them to have access to our teams, our players, our communities, and what sort of our brand culture is all about. And obviously, esports, I don't want to say we've been COVID agnostic because that's not true, but the virtual world in which we live in has allowed us to continue through Twitch and Discord to communicate, to have our fans have that immersive experience and really get into the lives of our players. When one of our players is sitting there twitching from home, it does allow one of our fans to sort of see him in his own environment and actually communicate with him and have that very immersive experience. And so that's sort of like what we're calling our new media model, and what we're trying to bring to our partners is weaving the DNA of their brand into the DNA of our brand and creating that connective tissue that immersively does give them a very authentic, immersive experience with our players, our team, and the brands in which we're also working with. So, with a long way of saying sort of a combination of both the esports model and the traditional sports model, but it's really about that new media model of immersive experience.
Great. Nicholas, last but certainly not least.
Hello, everyone. So I'm Nicolas Moret. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Team Vitality. We're a French esports organization based in Paris, one of the biggest in Europe. We have teams on 10 games, notably Counter-Strike, League of Legends. So when it comes to the question, I think it's obvious that there is no clear model yet for a sports team. Everyone trying to figure out his own things with different strengths, a different value proposition. I think replicating a classic sports model is an obvious positioning, but right now it just doesn't work on its own because it falls short on certain monetization area. For example, when it comes to the media rights or the match day revenue that doesn't exist really in esports yet, even if for some leagues like Overwatch is part of the model. We'll see how it goes when COVID is over. But what we can say about esports is really unique and diverse. You have many different ways to think about your business and monetize. There is a bigger entertainment component compared to traditional sport, where it's not only about competitive performance, it's also about entertainment, content creators, and different ways to engage with the fans. And I think that's something we'll touch on later on, is pretty important in the state of esports right now. So what I'd say as a team owner is we try to create our own path based on our specific strengths. For example, with Vitality, we're French-based. We have a very huge footprint here, so we have to build and think about our business tied to that strength. And different team have different model. If we look at FaZe, for example, it's the most prominent example of a brand that's based around influence and content creation. So every team is trying to figure out his way. One specific thing that's interesting to me is the huge potential for direct fan monetization, because fans are very closely connected to the brand and our brand ambassador, and I think that's super interesting to explore. I think it's just the beginning of the way we think about monetizing that fan experience. So a lot of things to think about and develop, and again, I say it's just the beginning of finding our models.
Thank you, Nicholas. Well, since you brought it up, I'm going to actually transition to a different question, which is, I think, many of us who are here on the panel heard earlier today that Esports Insider broke some news that's specific to one of our panelists today, which is Mr. Kevin Chu, and that Susie Kim is going to be launching her own token and joining Rally as an advisor. Is that something that we all heard today? Would you like to give us a little more information on that, Kevin?
Yeah, I'm very excited to be working with Susie. I met Susie when I first founded Gen G, and while I knew a little bit more about the U.S. esports scene, I didn't know very much about the Korea esports scene, especially around Overwatch and League of Legends. And so as we were looking to start up the Seoul Dynasty as well as our Gen G League of Legends team, we were just trying to understand who knew what. And Susie was always incredibly gracious with her time and just had great insights. Her now husband, previously I guess boyfriend or fiance, Monty, was also incredibly helpful. So and part of our discussion with Susie and Monty has always been how do we think about direct fan monetization? And specifically, if we think about direct fan monetization, there's maybe two broad buckets, right? One is merchandise and physical things, events, things that that have an analog in the traditional sports world. And then the second is digital monetization. And so what does that look like in terms of if you were to create a digital fan club, if you were to create digital collectibles, like a digital baseball card for esports? What would it look like if you had digital virtual currencies that were tied to an esports brand that allowed you special access to the coaches or the staff, talk to analysts before the game, as well as get into the post-game debrief. So we had a lot of these ideas that we were even kicking around as we were thinking through different business models at Gen G. And I said, wow, we've got to, this is going to be the future. And instead of us just building it, at the Gen G level, which didn't quite make sense because Gen G is all about getting great players and great, being a great esports team. I decided to start something called Rally, which is about how do we do this at scale, hire the very best engineers all over the world and the product managers to help make these experiences and software for esports teams and players to directly monetize. And as I set out on that journey, I thought, who better than to give a call to Susie Kim and a few others around the esports industry to see how do we bring together people who've been in and around this industry for a while, have seen it from a number of angles, whether it's her Susie's experience at Twitch to her experience at Cloud9 and the London Spitfire. It's just really, and just the person that she is. I'm very excited to welcome Susie to Rally and worked with her to work through some of these direct fan monetization ideas that we started kicking around a couple years ago.
That's great. I think that brings up a point that we kind of kicked around earlier when we got together, which is, I think, this global nature of the esports. And I think this next one I want to point towards Robin because she is the Houston Outlaws. The global nature of esports, both from an audience perspective plus a competition perspective, how has that either positively or negatively affected your monetization as a Houston team?
Yeah, I mean, we talk about that a lot in terms of, from a revenue generation standpoint and working with brands that don't have a global footprint or are outside our Houston, San Antonio, Austin, DMA. So number one, and having, we have not released our roster as of yet, but knowing that we quite possibly will have a couple of players that are outside the U.S. It is a challenge. It's a challenge for brands. It's a challenge for us, to work with brands that don't have a global footprint. So I would say from that aspect, I don't think it's negatively impacted, our business model. I think that our focus is on those brands that are in sort of the Houston DMA, we are restricted by, Overwatch to, look at some of the global brands from a revenue generation standpoint. But it's a conversation that we have a lot in terms of, when we're discussing sort of our revenue generation model and our partners for the Houston Outlaws. It's something that we continue to sort of try to, work through on a daily basis. So I don't have the greatest answer as far as, how that has impacted so far. It has not. It's just something that we continuously talk through on a daily basis.
Nicholas, can I pass that same question over to you because of your sort of
Yeah.
footprint in France?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting question. And I think the first thing I'd say is it's very difficult to establish a global brand. And even if you look at the most successful worldwide esports team, they still most of the time have specific ties to a region when it comes to their audience or the way they monetize. It's just a different of percentage. And when you try also to be global and cater to everyone, very easily you can find yourself in a situation where you engage with no one. So it's a very tough challenge. So there is no black or white positioning here because both model can work. If we look at Fnatic, the historical team in Europe, we can frankly say that they really succeeded in the fact that they never tied their brand to a specific country or specific identity. They all, from the get-go started to again engage with everyone, mostly in Europe for sure, but also in Asia with the Dota team. So that's an interesting story, but that's not an easy one to replicate. And I think when it comes to every team nowadays, I think what's important is that you have your own identity and you have a purpose, because otherwise you can just be just a generic team among 10, 20 others and have nothing specific to tell to your fans. And then what does it do? So for us, we have this history of being the French team. Very quickly, we established ourselves this way when we started in 2013. We dominated the French market. And as of today, we try to get the best of both worlds, which is not easy. When I say that, I want to say that we have viewers, fans all over Europe. We have players of 15 different nationalities. We have EMEA deals, global deals, but we also have a lot of French players, a lot of French fans, and a lot of French deals. I think it's an interesting challenge to try to get everything, but it creates also the problem sometimes that we are too French when it comes to talking, for example, with to get an EMEA budget, and when it comes to we're talking with a big French brand, they might say, "Hey, you're too international. Most of what I will be paying for will end up with international viewers, and I only have a French budget, and I only want to advertise to French audience." So it's not an easy positioning, but that's what we're trying to do. But ultimately, to your question, I think what's super important to me when you're a team is that, again, you need to have your own perspective, identity, storytelling to make sure you find your own place and not just be a generic team among a lot of those. I think it's maybe something we can sometimes see in North America when LCS went to franchise and you have suddenly a ton of teams applying. What's the difference? Obviously, you have the historical team that have their own story, C9 with their group of young players coming to LCS, TSM, legendary team, but all of the new teams, they need to try to find their own way. And if we look, for example, at FlyQuest, it's super interesting what they've done because they have their own narrative, their own story, and yeah, we can say that FlyQuest is standing out in the pack. But for other teams, it might be more difficult. So to me, the question is really about that. Find your own identity and push it to the max.
Fantastic. I kind of want to take a similar type of question, but push it over to Daniel, because I think you probably have a more, I would say, a holistic view since you provide solutions to everyone. What do you see from a monetization perspective is the positives and negatives of having this truly global audience?
I think it's interesting, and something that Nicholas said kind of made me think about this, that, at some point, if you put your flag in France and you are the French team or known worldwide as the French team, that's not a bad thing. And I think that, in sports, you see rivalries and you see the bad team, right, or the bad boys of the team. I remember in my youth, the Detroit Pistons were always the bad boy of the NBA, right, or the Pittsburgh Steelers and things like that. So I don't think that it's necessarily a bad thing for you to craft your own brand in your locality. I think specifically like with the Outlaws, you've got a great name, right, to be the outlaw, bad boy, kind of a thing, and bring that so that, the French team versus the U.S. team, or, the Korean team versus, the Shock in San Francisco. I think it's interesting that it's not a bad thing for you to plant your flag, build your audience locally, and then portray that audience globally, right? Like portray your image, your brand globally, and you're going to absorb the viewers. Like people like difference. If somebody becomes too popular, to leave and go to, the anti-popular group. And we see that especially in the streaming world. When somebody hits a certain level at Twitch, like people don't go anymore because, they've sold out, right? Like the music world, they've sold out or they've gone mainstream or whatever. So there is that undercurrent of population that I think will grab to the U.S. brands globally, and the European brands in the U.S. and globally, et cetera. I think they will, right? But I do think something else that Nicholas said that I found interesting was as far as, brands and sponsors wanting to come in and say, well, we're a predominantly French company and we don't want to have our eyeballs or impressions that we're buying from you sent out internationally. I think the interesting thing that really can provide, and our AI can provide, is differentiating that and segmenting your content as it goes out, right? So you could sell potential sponsors to roll content in France, but then also roll out global advertisers for viewers that are outside of that, right? So there's a way to segment your content to the specific market that you're approaching. And I think, as we start storytelling, I think the story you tell internally in Houston is much different than the story you tell internally in Paris, right? But externally, I think we have to create kind of this soap opera-esque rivalry branding competition so that, the people in France are talking smack to the kids in Houston and back and forth. I think, creating that rivalry on a global level will elevate everybody.
Kevin, do you agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the rivalries are incredibly important in sports, and we of course see it in both national scale and on a city scale. And so I think those are things that we certainly lean into. What attracted us to Overwatch was the city scale, but on a global basis. So we were very excited to represent Seoul, kind of home of esports in Overwatch. And so we definitely see the sort of city-based, structures kind of, in the emergence of fan bases that are local to kind of some of these urban regions that are really interesting. And then for, League of Legends, based on the way that that's been structured, since the beginning, it's much more on a global sort of national scale, with kind of, Worlds and MSI being, representing kind of the different regions and the best teams from those regions. And so you get sort of this incredible, global national rivalry almost. And it's kind of where we are in LCK. We're obviously very excited about the franchise, that they finally rolled out to the LCK. And then we just see this incredible rivalry with the LPL teams in LCK, especially in the last few years between, LPL and LCK, winning, kind of taking all the various titles at Worlds and MSI and so forth. So we're, the rivalries and the storylines are incredibly important. And I think, but it also speaks to how important it is to kind of think about business models that, and again, every team's going to have its own brand and identity. But I think one of the opportunities out there for the teams that really want to seize it is how do you create that, some of these global narratives, global, global personalities that kind of become the face of, the sport, right? So Faker points obviously in League of Legends, Faker, was that. And, in Shanghai, when he went to go compete, back in the 2018 Worlds, the crowds surrounding him were unbelievable. I mean, in China, right? It was bigger than what he would get in Korea. So there are some of these global stories and personalities that emerge, and we see that every great sport has that emerge at some point, right? Whether it's Michael Jordan. So basketball, etc. So I think that teams that really think about how do you develop that, how do you create these storylines, the leagues that help support it, and then what are the business models that take advantage of a much more global, much more digital environment. And I think that's kind of where some of the more interesting, opportunities. And as we've been talking about, I think it's not 100% this and 0% of that. It's really going to be a blend. And I think the traditional sports models are also, like Formula Racing and a few of these other things. They're sort of, embracing much more digital, much more direct to fan, sort of participation in the competitions. And so there's going to be more and more blurred lines, I think, in the years to come with technology permeating every part of our lives. And I think that's really exciting. It leads to new opportunities for those that want to really be on the innovative edge of exploration.
So I kind of want to shift gears just a little bit. We've been talking sort of specific to teams and brands. I kind of want to talk about the industry as a whole for a second. I'm not sure if you guys all caught an article that came out this summer in Adweek that showed a really interesting infographic where it talked about the population's media diet and where people are spending their time versus where brand dollars are being invested. And the reality is it's flipped completely upside down. Something like 38% of the global media diet is spent in esports gaming, both from playing but also in watching. And yet they estimate only $1.5 billion of brand dollars went into the industry in 2019, whereas network television is only consuming about 8% of our time in terms of our media diet, and it got nearly $60 billion. Now, part of that is because of the longevity of it. Part of it is, I think, also the fractious nature of both the gaming and esports landscape. You have so many different pockets and so many different niches. So my question, and I don't know who wants to put their hand up to answer first, is, if we're looking at this from a macroeconomic sense that, rising tide lifts all boats, the question I kind of have is right now, do we have too many tiny little boats to be able to rise that tide? Is it too fractured? Is there too many teams? Oh, Nicholas put his hand up first. So I'm going to pass it over to you, Nicholas.
Yeah, well, I think before I answer the question precisely, I think it's something I think I'm saying since I started in esports. It's still complicated for advertiser and brand to understand. It's obviously getting better with the franchises. So that means less team in a premier division where it's clear that the competition happens there. Publishers are all making effort to streamline the competitive calendar and schedule. So it's easier and easier to understand what is going on. It's still not easy though. For example, we're hiring a lot of people in the company, CFO, marketing, or whatever roles you want. And when they go in the first meeting and we're talking about the last week results from our esports team, I look at them and they have no clue. Like, okay, so in Rocket League, you have those two competitions ongoing at the same time. In CSGO, you have the qualifier for this or that competition. It's extremely complicated from an ecosystem competitive perspective. So it's not only about the teams, it's about what is esports? Oh, okay, esports is that, but it's also this. It's a diverse, multiple reality that is very hard to grasp. Add to the fact that it's changing, but it's still the case that most of the agencies that are advising those advertisers are not really understanding the full scope of esports. They can be misguiding because either they don't know, either they have interest in various stakeholders in the ecosystem, maybe not the right one. So it's very complicated to navigate when you are outside of the esport niche. Okay, we're maybe not a niche anymore. We're more and more mainstream, but still, when you look at traditional sport, we all understand what is Super Bowl, to take an American example, what is Champions League, to take a European example. Those are the key competition with the eyeball. So esport is getting structured, so it's getting way better. And the fact that the publisher are now creating the competitive environment most of the time helps a lot in that regard. When it comes to teams, I think it's tied to the previous question and the franchise coming. When you have a franchise, there is one competition with a certain defined number of teams. So that makes everything way easier. So we're exactly in that moment where it's getting transformed and changed. So I wouldn't say there are too many teams. It's great for the diversity and the dynamism of our ecosystem that you see new teams coming. You see sportsmen launching their own team, influencer launching their team. Everyone is trying. That's good to see that energy. At the end of the day, what is relevant is to see how many big teams are occupying the market. And it doesn't matter if there are a million teams. At the end of the day, you will have 10 relevant teams in Europe, maybe five in the US, and that's what matters. And that's always also why, for example, looking at Vitality, we always try to seek investment very early, because we understood that in our situation, either you're part of this club of 5 big teams in Europe that will attract sponsorship revenue, that will be able to sign the best player, that will be able to get into the franchise. Either you're done or you're just a small tiny fraction of the ecosystem. So there can be a ton of teams. What matters is how many big tier 1 teams you find, and that's where the money will go eventually, and it's already the case.
And I
Does
think,
anybody else?
and I think, yeah.
Okay, go Dan.
No, I was just going to
Quick,
say, I think we see that when we talked about with, traditional sports and everything too, right? Like you when it comes to baseball, the Yankees, the Cardinals, the Dodgers, like there's some franchises that are long-standing dynasties, so to speak. And then there's kind of like the Pittsburgh Pirates or some of the smaller tier teams that have a really great local audience and they have some diehard fans. I speak to the Cubs. Have super diehard fans, but they're not the big ticket items, right? And so I think the same thing of what Nicholas said, I think is right. I think you'll have a lot of those out there that have become the top tier, and then you'll have those that are kind of the also-ran that have their little niches. And I think that makes a lot of sense. I think that's definitely there. One thing I also want to remind everybody that, for the NFL, for NBA, for even soccer in Europe, like it's taken decades for them to build up to this, right? It's not like they were born 5 years ago and suddenly they popped. Like there's a growth period. We're in it right now. It still remains to be seen if it gets on par with that. But in the aggregate, I think it proves that there's interest. Like now, can we turn that into a long-standing dynasty of content and teams and competition? I think we can, but that still remains to be proven.
Robin?
Well, I also think when we're talking about sort of the spend against esports, I think that's when we also have to take a look at sort of moving to a little bit more of a traditional media model, meaning that we are being asked by our partners to prove ROI, right? And so therefore, there hasn't really been a standardized metrics of measurement the way that TV has Nielsen and so on and so forth. And so we're all starting to being asked a lot more to prove their investments and the success of those investments that they're making with the teams or the brand. And therefore, I don't think that those dollars can grow until we really do a better job of proving ROI. I think that we're being asked of it more and more. And as we're able to prove it, those dollars will grow because they're, if you're talking to an ad agency and they're having to prove to the client that they dipped their toe in esports, and the client says, what do you mean you dipped your toe in esports? Prove to me that that investment worked. The more that we're able to prove those investments worked and there was a metric of success that was truly measurable, I think that those investment dollars will continue to grow. But, I feel like a lot of esports deals, have been written on the back of a cocktail napkin. And, that's not going to work anymore. If we want to see those investment dollars continue to grow in esports, we've got to do a better job of proving, their investments and ROI.
Thank you, Robin. I actually, from my perspective, starting to work with some of these very large multinational brands, that's exactly where they start. That's the first thing that we start talking about. It's about the audience, the size, and the repetition of audience. And so I think you're absolutely right, Kevin. I'm going to actually transition into our final question because I just got a bug in my ear that says we have 10 minutes left, and I want to make sure everybody gets a chance around the panel to say anything that they missed. I mean, I have 5 other questions here that we didn't get to, which always happens. But I want to give this your time, and I think we've talked about brand spend. We talked about direct contribution. We talked about, for lack of a better term, digital swag for team and merch. Is there anything else that a team can do to win the future when it comes to their business model and monetization? That's my final question to each of you at the panel. And we're going to go around the room again in the clock. And so we're going to start with you, Kevin.
Yeah, I think that I do want to kind of touch on this last question a little bit more, because I think the consolidation in esports, I think, is going to happen. There's a lot of unprofitable teams out there, and yes, the franchises are helping, and the leagues are I think getting a little bit more sophisticated in terms of helping working together with the teams on sustainable business models. But there's a lot of unprofitable esports businesses out there, and I think when I look at it from a gaming perspective, I think of a lot of what's happened in the traditional games industry, and that you have a lot of these esports teams who are great at building rosters and getting coaches and being competitive and building a narrative around their teams, but they haven't quite figured out the monetization model. And the fact is, at the end of the day, if you're talking to advertisers and you're talking to the global sponsors that are out there, like, unless you have an audience in many millions, it's hard to get some of those sponsorships. And there's only a few teams that sort of are able to compete for the seven-figure types of sponsorships. And so if you have a fan base that is a few 100,000 or tens of thousands, I think the one of the most there's plenty of games that are very successful at that range. To give you an idea, like an average game, like a good well-monetized game that has 100,000 active players in it can make $30 to $50 million a year. That's all coming through direct monetization of that fan base, right? And I think a lot of teams out there who are getting started, who have a great passionate fan base, but aren't the phases and aren't the some of these other much more well-established names. I think there's a directive model that should absolutely be explored. And I think there's not enough companies working on it. That's one of the things that I'm very passionate about changing at Rally, is helping teams, helping players, helping streamers that have smaller fan bases think, okay, great, I've got 10,000 really passionate fans. What if I make on average $20 per fan, right? A sponsor is never going to pay you $20 per fan, right? That's just not going to happen. But if you were to create your own ways to engage that fan base and deliver to that fan base exactly what they want, which is to be passionate, to be connected to your team, connected to the players, those are the things that you can build a great business off of. And I think teams that figure this out sooner than later, they're going to be the ones that start to consolidate some of the market, right? Because the teams that can figure out the business models and then say, oh, okay, there's this other great team that's in this game that we're not in, they're not monetizing yet. We can take that, we can acquire that team and plug them into the monetization and business model engines that we're figuring out. Great. Like, those are the teams that are going to start to win and grow through consolidation, which is always a great place to be. And so I think this entire industry needs to, there's great sponsorship dollars and continue to do that, but really think about how do we directly monetize the fan base and deliver to that fan base, not, great interactive experiences with our sponsors, which, the fans will maybe tolerate, but great interactive experiences with our team, with our players, with our coaches. I think that's kind of where the industry, that's where some of the biggest opportunities are.
Awesome. Daniel.
Yeah, I mean, I would piggyback off of that. I think that, it's the power of your audience, right? The television networks pick up the dollars primarily out of sporting events, right? Because there's, it's FOMO, like, you don't want to miss out and everybody's tuned in live. But I think, television is delivered, right? Like, been able to say, here's how many dollars we can drive, from this advertising in the Super Bowl, and you're going to pay $3.5 million for this 30 seconds, right? So to Kevin's point, if you build those fans in such a way that you putting out a pair of headsets on your website is a big deal. Like, you can move 10,000 headsets because you pick this headset, it's branded to Houston or whatever it is, but it's this brand. I mean, that's powerful. So if you can build that audience at the core, at the grassroots, and then you can start to grow internationally, I think that's the right way to do it. And building up that really good core group. And I know Robin and I have talked about this with the Outlaws, and how to do that and how to bring that all together. And for me, and just to be selfish with really, we're about getting your content out quickly to your fans, right? So our AI, we kind of look at it as a human mind, right? So when you view something, your brain is immediately tagging things that are important, and you're rating them, right? And you're saying, okay, I'm going to store this because that was a really great moment. For us, those memories are digital, so you can spread them around the globe. And so I think what I would like to see, selfishly, is I'd like to see a lot of teams realize that the storytelling is as important as the gameplay, right? The personalities are as important as their capabilities on the screen, because people don't follow professional gamers; they follow entertainment, right? They want the oh my gosh moment. They want the super surprise. They want the comeback. They want the underdog that miraculously comes out and beats the dynasty, or beats the shock, or whatever. Like, those are the kind of stories that have to be told. And I think content is such a huge part of building up that loyalty, building up the narratives, building up rivalries, and everything we've been talking about.
Thank you, Daniel. Robin, quickly.
Yeah, no, so, I would
Sorry.
definitely piggyback both on Kevin and on Daniel. I think, what we're trying to do at the Houston Outlaws, and we will be successful in doing so, is doing just what Kevin and Daniel said. I mean, we are not only rebuilding our front office, our back office, our roster, but everything that we're doing from a fan experience. And I know, it's like as Kevin said, it's one thing to create an immersive fan experience with our brands, but also, and which we plan to do with great content, but we plan to give our fans sort of that access to our players and teams that they are so, badly looking for. They want to know what's on their playlist. They want to know what's on their shopping list. They want to know, all these crazy things, but that's sort of what our fans are telling us, that they want that, peek under the hood, that behind the scenes, a look in, what they're doing when they're not streaming, and so, it's about storytelling. It's about creating that content. It's about giving that access to our fans that they wouldn't normally have. It's rebuilding a team of not only a high performing players, but also those that have some marketability, that could help us create that content that is not cringeworthy, that is totally authentic and immersive, and gives our fans sort of that access that they're looking for. So that's our game plan moving forward into 2021 and beyond. And we're already seeing, we launched our content creator contest yesterday, where we're looking for 3 content creators that will be on the payroll of the Houston Outlaws, and deliberately to do it to have more content creators, right? Outside of our players and whatnot, and knowing how important content is and how important that storytelling is. So I think that we're positioned, to set ourselves up really well. I think that the things that we all talked about here, are the things that it's music to my ears, because I feel like we're doing a lot of that, and I'm really excited. So, yeah, that was my little pitch.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Robin. I'm going to sort of say a wrap, and then I'm going to hand it over to Nicholas, and hopefully they won't cut us off. I really appreciate all the panel coming here today. You guys were amazing. This is a fantastic conversation. I feel honored to be with all of you. And I'm going to leave it over to Nicholas for our last word.
Yeah, so quickly adding on what was said, I think it's very relevant and makes a lot of sense. I think it's super interesting to look at the core fans that are emotionally attached and engaged to your team and your story. So obviously the sheer number of fans, the overall audience that you can reach, it's super important when it comes to putting your team at the forefront, selling sponsorship and everything. But ultimately, if we ask ourselves how to win the future, we need that big core fan base that lives and dies with your team. That's one thing that we can absolutely replicate for traditional sport. People that grows loving team X or Y, and because when their kids, this specific team is winning, they have this emotional bond to that team. And the key thing that we need to succeed on is look at those fans, put them inside of the team. It can be via content, via everything we do, but make sure they have this emotional and strong engagement to the team. And ultimately, when you have that big core fan base that live with your brand, you can start by monetizing them, and then it can extend to the whole fan base you have. But I say this is a mandatory starting point, and it's super important to cater to those specific fans and give them a ton of attention. It's super important to us.
Thank you, guys. Have
Thanks,
a
everyone.
great rest
Thanks,
of
everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.